for God, then we make an idol of other people. And we see that that's precisely what happened to Saul. He turned away from God because he cared more about man's opinion. And one of the interesting points regarding the character of David is that David doesn't go out and proclaim to everyone, look, God just anointed me king. He didn't go out even though he knew that God had anointed him, that God had chosen him to be the next king of Israel. He didn't go and make a big deal about it. He didn't go and promote it. He didn't go and flaunt it in front of people's faces. But yet we see that Saul was able to see that God was with David. Saul finds out, not because of David's words, not because of David's proclamation, but because of his character. Saul was able to see that God was with David. And likewise, when we look at the life of Jesus, we see that when Jesus begins his ministry, he doesn't proclaim himself to be the Messiah. He knows very well that he's the chosen and anointed one. But yet he allows the works and the ministry that he's doing to speak and testify of who he was. He didn't have to go and say it. In fact, even when the demons would speak out of people and they would say, "Oh, Jesus, the Son of God," he would tell them to shut up. He would tell them to be quiet because he didn't want the enemy to help him. He wanted the works that he did. He wanted the Father to testify that he was the anointed one, that he was the Mashiach, the Messiah. And he allowed the ministry to testify for him. And God showed the world that Jesus was the Christ. So I think that's a very interesting point, similarity that we find in the life of David. So we see that likewise, in our lives, it should be the Spirit of God that bears fruit through us that truly testifies that we are God's children. So David, who was anointed king in chapter 16, we now find in chapter 17 coming to deliver some provisions for his brothers. We see that his father sends David to go send some provisions to his brothers who were on the front lines on a war, on a conflict that was going on between Israel and its enemies, the Philistines. And what's interesting is that when we look at the parallels with Jesus as well, is that we see that Jesus was born also in a time of great political conflict. When Jesus was born in Israel, in Bethlehem, Israel was under the dominion of the Roman Empire. There was a great political turmoil that was going on in Israel, and he was born in such a time. And not only did he come into our life in a time of turmoil or into the world, but he also came into the world at a time of spiritual conflict, and specifically what was going on with Israel. We looked at everything that God had established in Israel, the law. A lot of the things had become deviated. The Pharisees, who were the ones that were supposed to be an example and show and teach the people the law, were taking advantage of the people. The temple that was to be used to offer prayer and sacrifices to the Lord and worship had now become a place of business, a place of enterprise, and people were hopeless. They were under the political oppression and they were under religious oppression as well. And this is the time and where Jesus comes about. And we see here that David also, his first appearance after he's anointed, he shows up in this time of turmoil. So it's possible that what we're seeing here in this story of David and Goliath is one that speaks about deeper things. So I want to go ahead and start reading 1 Samuel chapter 17. I'll read verses 1 through 9, touch on some couple of points, and I'll pass it over to Brother Lou. And we're going to be looking at things from different perspectives, but ones that we know will be a blessing to you. So the scripture says in 1 Samuel 17, starting in verse 1, he says, "Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shokah, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shokah and Azekah in Ephes Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side. And there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am I not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall you be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And we see that there's quite a lot of things going on here. There's a lot of interesting details that the scripture gives us. The very first thing that the Bible tells us, the Bible specifically tells us where is the location that this battle is taking place. The Bible tells us that Israel and the Philistines are arrayed in a specific way, and the Philistines are between Shokah and Azekah. Now, this is very interesting here that the Bible tells us this. Whenever we find a word, specifically a geographical location, we should do a search and a concordance to see if that place is mentioned somewhere else and what takes place in that set location. What's interesting about this place that the Bible mentions here, specifically Azekah, when you look up this word Azekah, this specific geographical location, you'll find and you'll read in Joshua chapter 10 that it was the place where God defeats the Amorite kings with hailstones, with stones that come from the sky, and he destroys those 5 kings. Now, with context of the story that we're looking at, and if you already know the story of David and Goliath, you know that the stone plays a very important role in this story. So what we're seeing here in this story of David and Goliath, when we, just by looking at this detail, Azekah, the place where in the book of Joshua, God destroys those foreign armies with hailstones. And we see that it is the same place here where the Philistines are gathered, that this should not come as a surprise that this is speaking about something deeper and something greater. And we'll see that account in Joshua chapter 10. In that battle, the one leading the army is Joshua, which is the Hebrew variation of Jesus. And so there's obviously some connection with all this. These details are very important. They are here in Azekah, in the valley of Azekah. Going to verse 3, we see that the battle was to take place in the valley between the 2 armies. And this is also true about us, brother and sister. Typically, the battle that you and I will face will take place in the valley. And the valley in the scriptures and in the spiritual lives typically represents a low point of life, a time where we're experiencing difficulty. We're experiencing, perhaps we are a bit discouraged. And it is typically in these low points where the enemy tries to attack us, that we are tempted to question our faith, to question whether God is with us or whether he has led us here, whether he will keep his promise or not. It is those times where we have to fight the hardest. There's this saying that goes like this. It says, pray the hardest when it's the hardest to pray. Because it is those times when we are discouraged where the enemy unleashes everything that he has on us. And that's not to say that there's not times where we're on the mountain, where we're experiencing good, that there's also temptation. There is. But it just seems to be more common when we're in the valley. So the two armies are faced here in the valley. And verse 4 tells us that in this valley, God's enemy sends their champion. And this champion that we see here in verse 4, Goliath of Gath, he is a representation of the devil. He is a representation of the devil. The Bible gives us some very interesting details about this champion, about this giant, that is very important for us to pay attention to. Specifically, the details of the description regarding what he's wearing, specifically his armor and the weight of his armor. The Bible tells us that he has a height of 6 cubits. We see that he has 6 pieces of armor. And the Bible tells us that his spearhead weighs 600 shekels, which when we all add that up, we get the number 666, which the Bible tells us is the number of the beast, and associated with the dragon as well. And it's very important whenever we find that number 666, more than likely it has something to do with the Antichrist as well. And not only do we find the number of the beast associated with Goliath, but in the original Hebrew translation, and in some other English translations as well, when you read verse 5, here in the King James, when he's speaking, it says he has a coat of mail, which is a specific type of armor that was worn over the chest and over the arms. But in the Hebrew, the word that is used is scale armor. In fact, the NIV translates it not to coat of mail, but he's wearing scale armor. And I challenge you to look up scale armor in Google to see how it is. And one of the interesting things about the way that scale armor looks is that it looks very reptilian. It looks very serpentine. You look at scale armor and it reminds you of either a lizard or a snake. And this is very important because the scripture tells us, specifically in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verse 9. I'll just go ahead and read it. It says, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil, and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." So the Bible calls Satan the great serpent, the old serpent. And here we have this person who is obviously a representation of the devil, not only because of the number 666 that is associated with Goliath, but the fact that he is dressed in scales. And if you look at the way that scale armor looks, it looks very closely to, it looks very similar to the skin of a serpent. So this giant, which is a representation of the devil, set specific rules. The rules for the battle. And if you read between 8 and 10, verses 8 and 10, it says, "And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am I not I a Philistine, and ye your servant to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight me and kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us." Now, what's interesting about the rules that are set for this battle is that the war and the battle